It is 6 o'clock. Oh, we will begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum.
Here.
Councilmember Burnt.
Here.
Councilmember Palmer.
Here.
Councilmember Little Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilmember Borton.
Here.
And Mayor DeVeerd is not here this evening.
Thank you. Item number 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all rise and join us in the pledge.
I just want to acknowledge that you're just so good, and we appreciate your grace and this place that you've made, that created for us to live, and that you've given us life. And so we appreciate that so much, God. And Lord, I'm also grateful for the country that we live in, that we have freedom to pursue our hopes and dreams and live where we want to, and enjoy our great freedom that so many have sacrificed for us ahead of us. And Lord, also we're grateful for the city that we have and the peace and prosperity that there is. It's an awesome thing, Lord. Thank you for all those who serve here. Lord, we're praying for the first responders this evening, the police and those who help with medical emergencies, and just all those who serve the public. God, I pray that you would provide for them, and that there would be peace and safety here tonight. Lord, also we're thinking of those who are poor or maybe hungry this evening, and I pray that they would find their way to some place where they could get their needs met, those services that are available to them, and that we would show them love. And last but not least, God, I just pray for the council here tonight and all the things that are discussed, the city business and all those matters, big and small. I pray, God, that you would bless these servants that represent us, and God, that you would give them lots of wisdom and grace. And so we thank you so much in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Item number 4, adoption of the agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
I see no need to make any changes, so I move we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda as published. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agenda is adopted. Item number 5, announcements. This was a suggestion I think Councilman Cavanagh had recommended we try and move to the front when we've got more of a crowd, talking about some of the upcoming events and some announcements. Unplug and Be Outside all week is this week. There's dozens of events. The city website has a description of all the ways and opportunities you can unplug, or you can not look at our website and literally unplug and then run around, get fresh air. Kind of a trap there. Main Street Market is Saturday 9 to 2 on Broadway. It's expanded, bigger and better this year. The Main to Meridian groundbreaking is May 13th, 4:30 on the corner of Main and Broadway. You can tell that there's lots of work going on and things have been leveled, so that'll occur on May 13th. We have today at noon, our very own Councilwoman Genesis Mylum was recognized, rightfully so, by the Chamber. She received the Chairman's Award for her vast array of services and kindness and work you do in our community, so I'm glad that you were honored and recognized for that. We've all seen it. So you help out in a lot of ways in our community, so that was great. And then last but not least, also today, the Meridian Library District, your library, announced that they were selected and received the National Medal for Museum and Library Services, the gold medal. It's a huge award and recognition for our library district for what they do in our community. Gretchen and their staff will be heading back to DC later on to accept the award. It's very prestigious, and libraries around the country, she has described, have reached out to congratulate her. So it's a testament to the great work that our library district does in our community. So if you go to the library, tell the staff congrats, and if you see Gretchen, let her know as well. Those are the announcements. So far, so good. Future meeting topics. Mr. Clerk, anyone? sign
Mr.
up?
President, nobody was signed in.
Okay, moves us to item number 7, the consent agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh,
I move we approve the consent agenda as published for the council president to sign and the clerk to attest.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as published. There's no discussion. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt? Councilmember Palmer? Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Item number 9, under community items and presentations, we have our MIAC, our Youth Council update. Mr. Hutchins, Ben, welcome. Thanks for coming tonight. Podium
Thank you,
is
City
yours.
Council.
You bet.
I'm the Vice Chair for Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, Ben Hutchins. And first of all, we just recently had at our last meeting the MIAC elections. So I'm going to introduce you to our new members, some new faces and some old ones. This year we have Jaylana Corsi as our chair. Abby Hutchins, my sister, is going to be filling in my position next year as vice chair. Katrin Neely is going to be our secretary. Courtney McBride is our communications coordinator. Chloe Robbins is our social coordinator. And then our school ambassadors, we have Luke Amar for our Rocky Mountain High School ambassador. Tyson Dunn is our Meridian High School ambassador. Brooke Arnold is our at-large co-ambassador. Ty Post as our Mountain View High School ambassador. Hannah Chalum as our Rocky High School ambassador. Travis McQuarrie as our at-large co-ambassador. And then our subcommittee chairs and vice chairs. Carson Moore is community service vice chair, or chair. Sarah Gonzalez is the community service vice chair. Logan Cloninger is our teen activities committee chair. Miranda Ramirez is our teen activities committee vice chair. Amber Graves as our government affairs chair. And Cole Satterfield is our government affairs vice chair. And then recently at our last meeting, we had Mad City Money, where CapEd came and helped us out, and they ran a month-long simulation teaching us how to balance checkbooks, how to be responsible with finances, taught us about credit cards, and spent 2 hours with us teaching us everything that we needed to know, giving us a rundown on the basics with financial information that we may not know and that will be helpful for our future. Any questions?
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the update. Council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh?
Ben, it was great to see you. I assume you're a senior and graduating.
Yes, sir.
You mind sharing with the council what your plans are, what you're going to do next?
Yeah, I'm going to be going to Oregon State University Cascades in Bend, Oregon. I'm going to be studying at the School of Business there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you for all you've done for MIAC, and I've always appreciated your updates. Youth Council's better because of you, and hope that after you leave and conquer Oregon, you come back and plant some seeds here in our community.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, and Mr. President, just if I could, I just want to thank, our MIAC does a great job, but we have remarkable advisors, and Jody oftentimes doesn't get recognized for the work that she does to elevate this council. And while our students are off finding success academically, Jody's setting the standards and developing the programs, and we have great employees here, and I just wanted to recognize you for all you do for MIAC and for our community.
Well said. Thank you, Ben. Council, any
Thank you,
other
City Council.
questions? Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right.
Good luck. Thanks, Ben.
Item number 10, department reports, CDBG, program year, funding recommendations. Maybe.
Thank you, Councilman. So I'm here tonight to let you guys know what came out of our application process. The CDBG scoring committee reviewed the submitted applications that are applying for funding for program year 19, which runs from October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020. So the application process, it started with the application being available from the middle of March to the middle of April. Right after that, the CDBG scoring committee reviewed those for the next couple of weeks. And on May 1st, then they looked those over and made the final recommendations that I'm presenting to you tonight. The scoring committee represented 4 of the Meridian residents, 1 Ada County Continuum of Care representative, 1 city council member, and 4 City of Meridian employees. That was representing the Community Development Department, Finance, and the Mayor's Office. We received 7 applications, and we were able to fund all of them. 2 applications were new, but the rest of them were projects that we've seen before. We received requests for about $50,000 more in funding than we had available, and the projects are broken out on the following slides in 3 categories. The first one is public services for low to moderate income households, which was capped at 15% of the total grant. Then we also had public facilities and housing and projects that benefit the redevelopment plan. These projects on the screen, this is how they were ranked for the public service projects. The top ranking one was the Jesse Tree of Idaho's Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which provides one-time rental assistance to Meridian residents who are at immediate risk of homelessness. We funded, or we're recommending funding, a little bit less than what they had requested. The Boys and Girls Club Scholarship Program provides scholarships to kids to participate in the extended care programs, and we are recommending that they receive funding what they requested. The next 2 programs are the 2 new ones. The first one is CATCH, and they have a SOAR application program, which provides care coordination and assistance to individuals applying for SSI and SSDI who are experiencing homelessness and have a mental health disorder. We're recommending funding a little bit less than what they had requested because it's a new program and we just have limited funds. The final public service project is Pathways Community Crisis Center, which provides up to 23-hour and 59 minutes of triage and stabilization for adults experiencing a mental health or substance use crisis. And this one is quite a bit less, but again, we have limited funds. So they requested $30,000 and we are recommending $13,500. For the public facilities and housing projects, we have the Ada County Housing Authority Homeownership Program that provides funding to supplement the down payment and closing costs associated with purchasing a home. They requested $50,000 and we're recommending $30,000. And then Public Works is wanting to upgrade and install streetlights along walking routes to the Meridian schools, several different ones. And they are requesting $125,000 and we're recommending $115,662. The final project is in the redevelopment area, and this is the MDC sidewalk project that is going to be improving the area along East 3rd Street, and they requested $180,000, and we're recommending that they receive it all. So the next steps, as long as there's no big concerns with what our recommendations were, then I'm going to continue working on the action plan, and on June 4th, then I'll present that to you, and I will include a short presentation from the providers coming in for select ones. We won't have time for all of them, but I'm hoping that you'll give me some feedback on some that you definitely want to see. And then we'll have the action plan open for public comment until July 16th, when we'll have a public hearing and close public comment. The following week, on July 23rd, then I will present any edits we have and request that you approve the final plan, and on the 31st, or no later than the 31st, then I'll submit the plan to HUD for final approval. So again, I want to make sure that I know which projects and providers you guys want to hear from, but definitely the 2 new ones. And if there's any other ones that you guys would like to hear from, then I'd like to hear that. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Great report. Council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
Crystal, thanks. You're so efficient and thorough. I feel like I get tons of information. I really appreciate it. A couple of questions. With those organizations that were recommended funding less than the requested amount, we've had an opportunity to communicate with those applicants and they feel confident that they can achieve the goals that they were looking to achieve with that reduced amount?
Yes, we haven't, I didn't want to talk to them too much about it. I let them know that they received the first recommendation, but until I had heard back from council, then we haven't had any in-depth conversations. But from talking to them during the application process, I think that they'll be happy, especially the 2 new projects, just getting their foot in the door so that they can score a little higher next time.
Mr. President, a couple comments. I'm supportive of the recommendations. I would like to hear from the 2 new ones just to get a better sense. I always worry, an organization builds a plan and they submit it with the dollars that we need, and then we recommend less. Sometimes those are all the dollars that they have. And so I don't want us to create a false expectation for them that now they've got to find additional dollars to achieve the outcomes and goals. And it may be better to recommend funding at a lower amount or not at all if the dollars that we're going to allocate, they're not going to be able to use. And then just an additional comment, I think, moving forward for future years, I know that you worked really, really hard to try and address some of the challenges with the Meridian Food Bank, and I really appreciate that. Obviously, it's really disappointing for me to not see something related to that. I see Patty's here, the great article in the Meridian Press about Dan Clark retiring and the great work that the Meridian Food Bank does. And I think all of you know I was a former board member, and specifically that backpack program is so critical, not just to kids, but to their families. That's often the only food that they have on the weekend. So I guess a request would be is between now and a year from now, if we can figure out a way either through the Idaho Food Bank or another food shelter to try and partner with them to restore that funding back at least to the backpack program. I see that just being a critical need for our community, especially our little ones.
Council, any other questions or direction for June 4th? Okay, thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I like what you had to say.
It moves us to item number 11, or action items. Our first one is going to be the Impact Fee Advisory Committee recommendation. As you know, we've got a large group of talented citizens who've worked long and hard reviewing a bunch of data and a bunch of objective metrics, trying to update and revise our impact fees, ensure they're code compliant. So Mr. Lavoie is going to kick off the presentation. As I understand it, we're going to walk through the work of the committee, where we were and where the recommendation is that we might go. We're not necessarily asked to take action tonight, but to allow us to digest it, chew on it, and then it should be on the agenda for next week for any follow-up discussion and a decision by the council. So, Todd, take it away.
Mr. President, members of the council, again, appreciate the opportunity to present to you tonight the Meridian Impact Fee Study. Tonight you'll have a presentation by our consultant, Raftalis Incorporation. They have Dwayne Guthrie is the principal that represented us on this study. We also have Matt Adams. He is a member of the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. So if we have any questions for him, he is here to answer any questions as well. The Finance Department and myself, I'm the administrator of the Impact Fee. We have Ted Barrett as the legal representation, and we also have the Parks Director, the Fire Chief, and the Police Chief as the other administrators or the representatives of the city for the Impact Fee Committee. This study that is being presented to you is part of the state of Idaho statute. Every 5 years, we must present to you a study. Last time we were here was in 2014. So this is meeting our obligation from a state statute standpoint that we present to you a study at a minimum 5 years. You can do it sooner. We've decided to do it every 5 years. Tonight, again, Dwayne Guthrie will present to you. I did hand out the printed version of the presentation for you. The study was presented to you about a month ago via email. I presented that full study. So if you want all the details, it's in that document. We don't have that here for you today. Presented that to you about a month ago. The study itself is a collaborative approach that the Impact Fee Committee members, all 7 of them, all department staff, including Fire, Parks, and Police, Finance, we had the Building Department, we had the IT Department, and the Planning Department, all involved with this discussion. And then you also had the consultant and his staff. So this is an agreed-upon study that we are presenting to you to consider. We are requesting the full cost recovery approach. So the dollars here are a full cost recovery standpoint. We are asking that you accept the report as presented. Again, we are here to answer any questions. The staff is here. Dwayne can answer a majority of the questions, and we have the committee as well. If you accept the report as is, we will have to have a public hearing in the future. So I'll listen to your guidance, and then we'll put a public hearing together for you, for the citizens and the community members to give an opinion on. So again, I will hand this off to Dwayne. He's going to give the majority of the presentation. The staff members are here to help answer any questions if you do have so. So I'll bring up Dwayne Guthrie from Raftalis. Question for you, Joe.
Yeah, Todd, I think for you, maybe for Bill, but that last part is the procedure that even if we acted tonight to accept the report, that just sets in motion a future public hearing and to determine if and how much we might want to implement as a new impact fee? Accepting the report isn't necessarily making a decision also on the fee
Correct.
itself.
Yes.
Is that right?
The direction would be if the council wants to direct us to bring it back, we would need to do an ordinance change to bring it back to make it effective.
But would we still have a public hearing though for
Oh,
this?
yes.
So if you guys accept the numbers, we'll do a public hearing in the future with the data that you've accepted in this report, and then allow the community to give the
Okay.
public input, and then Bill would do an ordinance based on your decision on the input.
Perfect. Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Cool, thanks. So I'll bring up Dwayne to present.
Welcome, Dwayne.
Good evening, council members. We have about 10 slides I'd like to go through with you guys this evening to give you an idea of what we've done. Just some highlights verbally of the study and the changes. A lot of these things are laid out in Idaho's enabling legislation for impact fees, like you have to update your land use assumptions, basically lay out all of the projected development, rates of growth, that type of thing. So we've done that. Your community is kind of on like an exponential mode. You're moving along quite well, and in fact, that was one of the big needs for the study is to take account of the actual development that's happened in the last 5 years. Then we have to also in Idaho document our current levels of service. That's one of the requirements, that the fees have to be based on those existing levels of service. And then we, using our development projections, project out the need for additional facilities over the next 10 years. And so that's included in my presentation this evening. We're making some recommended changes this time around. Now the current fees are per dwelling unit with no variation by type, like single-family, multifamily, or no variation by size. And those are usually your two basic options. Best practices that most communities now are moving more towards the breakdown by size thresholds. It's a little easier to implement. So it's kind of like the small, medium, and large kind of concept, but with most of your apartments being at the smaller end of the threshold, kind of the more traditional 3-bedroom, single family kind of in the middle, and then larger 4+ bedrooms kind of at the upper end. That's the concept. The reason you do it by size is it's a little easier to implement, so you don't have to worry about, is this a townhouse or a condo or a zero lot line or all those kind of ownership variations. Those aren't important. We just get the actual size of living space from your building permit records, and that's how we assess the fees. The other change is we're recommending 2 non-residential categories this time around. The current fee schedule is just every type of non-residential pays the same. So commercial would be like your retail restaurant. That'll have a slightly higher fee. All other would be industrial, institutional, offices, healthcare, all those kind of things would be in that other category. And those have a little bit lower rate per 1,000 square feet or based on floor area of the building. So I'd like to kind of drill down and give you some summary tables up front, and then we'll look at a little of the details for the 3 fees that we're doing, which are Parks and Recreation, Police, and Fire. So here's in words kind of what how the fees are set up. All the fees are being based on citywide service area. The community doesn't really need to, based on the type of infrastructure that we're basing the fees on. We're focusing more, like, for instance, on larger parks that would draw patrons from the entire community, things that involve league play, that type of thing. We're not doing small neighborhood parks that a lot of times are just included in the provided by developers as part and maintained even a lot of times by homeowners associations. So for parks, we're doing park improvements, the things I mentioned, and also recreation centers. That's a new component that we're adding. Then for police, we're focusing on buildings. One of the unique things in Idaho is that you also have a useful life requirement for vehicles, and a lot of the police cars get turned over faster, and they're really not eligible for that. How we're allocating costs for police is based on functional population. That's the idea. We have data on the people that live here and also jobs within the community, the jobs in Meridian. And so we make some adjustments for commuting patterns and then time spent like at work versus home. So those are what we call functional population. And we look at calls for service, and we decided we needed those broken down in a little more detail, and we didn't quite have that level of detail this time around for police and fire. So functional population is a good methodology to basically allocate what's the percentage that needs to be paid by residential versus non-residential, and that's what we've done. Now, when we get into the actual differentiating the fees for commercial versus all other types of non-residential, then we use trip generation rates for that because, as you guys know, the commercial development, retail, restaurants, those type of things have a much higher trip generation rates per 1,000 square feet, and they also have much higher calls for service. So Walmarts and those kind of things generate a lot more call volume per 1,000 square feet than like an office building or industrial building. So that's one of the reasons the way we've differentiated the fees. On fire, we're looking at fire stations and also their rolling stock, their apparatus. They do maintain those or keep those longer than 10 years, and so they're eligible. And the only slight change on this one is on the non-residential. We're using job density, employees per 1,000 square feet to differentiate the fees. So things that have a lot of employees, like office buildings and institutional type of schools, those type of things, they have a little bit higher trip generation rate. Job density. So here's the proposed fee schedule. There's a column for each one of the fees. You'll see the fees broken out by the size thresholds. Just for comparison purposes, what we did was the arrow that's shown there that goes through the fourth row down that says 2,501 to 3,200 square feet. That would be basically the equivalent fee if you maintain your current methodology where all the units pay the same. And so if you just kind of want to get an idea of the magnitude of the dollar change, you can see that the proposed total for that fourth row down would be $2,943 for all the fees added together. The existing total using the previous study from 2013 would be 2017, so it would be an overall increase of $926. And we'll dive into the details to see there are some winners and losers. Steve and the parks folks get increases. Public safety is kind of flat. Police actually goes down a little bit, so there are some variations. So we'll talk about the details on those things in just a moment. Non-residential, those are per square foot of building, and then you'll see the commercial and all other, the two categories we're recommending. If we were to do the one fee for every type of non-residential, that's that very last row in the table that you should see there. You could see that the current fee is 47 cents per square foot. The proposed amount would be 56 cents per square foot. So it would be a slight increase, roughly 20%. So not a big change on the non-residential. But again, there's some variation. If you're commercial, you're going to be paying higher. All others, actually just a small decrease from what the fees are today. So now we'll dive in. I just have two slides for each one of the types of infrastructure to give you an idea. I know there's a lot of numbers, but we just kind of wanted to give you an overview of how the fees are calculated. So at the top, you'll see the major categories of the types of infrastructure that we're doing for our analysis. We documented the need for park improvements. Over 10 years, we'll be improving approximately another 100 acres of parks. We have a cost factor per acre for those improvements. So that would be things like athletic fields and basketball courts and all those kind of things included in that. Landscaping, it's an all-inclusive total project cost of $241,000 per acre. So we're looking at big dollars. It's over 10 years, approximately $24.6 million of park improvements that'll be needed just to accommodate new development. The reason that we only have a small amount for park land is you have some vacant, undeveloped parks that can be developed over the next 10 years, but doesn't quite match that 102 acres, so we need to purchase 5 additional acres, and that's why that's a relatively small amount. And then on the recreation center, we document our current relationship of square feet per population in the community. Projected out the need, you need an additional 17,000 square feet of community recreation centers over the next 10 years. Cost factor is $225 a square foot, so approximately $3.8 million of additional recreation centers over the 10 years. So that's the kind of thing that we did for each one of the departments, and I'll show you those details. And then we allocate the cost. This one goes all to residential, and so we did cost per service unit, which in this case is a resident. And so for each additional resident, you need to spend $744 for additional capital facilities. This is just capital, growth-related capital, is not operating cost and any of the impact fees. And then we multiply that by the average number of persons per housing unit. We have good demographic data from the Census Bureau. They do this thing called the American Community Survey. It's an ongoing monthly mail out, and we have demographic data that we can document the average number of people by the unit sizes. And we have local building permit data and assessor data that we use to get the size thresholds. So we have good data that document all these numbers, and we worked with the committee, and I think everybody's pretty happy with the analysis and the way the fees are broken out. So the line with the green bar all the way across, again, is that like if you were to basically do one flat fee for all units and no variation by type or size, that would be roughly what you would charge. But we are recommending that you break it out by size. And so actually, if you're a very small, like apartment, a 1 or 2 bedroom at the very smallest size threshold would actually get a little decrease in the fees. The other ones go up with the biggest increase for a unit over 3,200 square feet. So kind of flip through the park plan, how we're going to spend the money. And impact fees, there's 3 critical things that we always look for. We look for the need for additional facilities, the benefit to the fee payer, and that the fees are proportionate. And that's kind of all throughout our analysis. So part of the way we show benefit is how we're going to spend the money. So we actually have a comprehensive financial plan, and these are the improvements that you guys will be approving throughout the years. You can see on the left-hand column there the fiscal year. So some of these projects might be broken out on several years because you might do design in 1 year and then actual construction, that type of thing. So you're going to be spending money on West Meridian Regional Park, new community center, and then some additional parks there at the bottom of the table, and kind of see how that's broken out. So going down to the bottom right corner of the table, you can see the impact fees pay for approximately 80% of all these projects. They pay for the growth amount, but there are some additional features to some of these parks that for instance, you'll see at the top, these all improvements add up to 151 acres. The growth need is only 102 acres, and so there's a little bit of money that's going to be funded by other revenue sources. For police, it's a little simpler. For the top, you'll see we have police buildings, and then what's a little unique this time around, the staff is proposing an outdoor training facility. So we have a kind of a 23% growth share for that because it is a new thing that it basically, to set our levels of service, we basically looked at the amount of development over the next 10 years and compared it to the amount of development that we'll have in 2029, and that's how we came up with the projected growth share. So police are looking at adding approximately $4.7 million worth of improvements. We net out some existing fund balance and then come up with the amount that we're actually funding with the impact fees. So the middle portion of the table basically is the cost allocation, and the residential is done similar to the last one where we broke it out by housing units. Persons per housing unit, and then the bottom of the table shows the non-residential being broken out using trip generation rates, and that's how we come up with the fees for commercial and all other. So on this one, you can see in the residential section that the residential fees all actually go down slightly. The commercial fee is the only one that goes up, approximately 12 cents per square foot. For police, all other, which would be industrial offices, those type of things, actually have a small decrease also. And here's how the police department is planning to spend their money over the next 10 years, doing the training facility classrooms, adding on to the administration building in 2 phases, and then a substation. So you can see those things, and then the outdoor training facility we already talked about. Their gross share, the impact fees are paying for approximately 59% of their capital expenditures, and so there is a need for approximately $3.26 million to come from other revenues. Okay, the last 2 slides are on fire. We're doing fire stations and fire apparatus. You'll see at the top, approximately $11 million worth of improvements to add stations or expand stations, and then add rolling stock, about $2.9 million of additional apparatus. This is not replacing things you have today. This is expanding the fleet, adding new rolling stock. So cost allocation is kind of similar to the way we did the residential. At the bottom, the non-residential is being done based on jobs per 1,000 square feet. And you can kind of see that if you're the kind of average size residential, there's a slight increase of $12 per unit. If you're smaller than the average, you get a decrease in the fees. If you're larger, it's an increase of $128, sorry. And then on the non-residential, both of these go up slightly from what they were today. Part of the reasons on the change of the non-residential is that we had better data this time around. The previous study assumed some non-residential floor area calculations. We actually got assessor data this time to verify the actual non-residential floor area we had in the community. So part of the changes on the non-residential is just due to better data that we had this time. So that concludes my presentation. We'll talk about, the fire expenditures. At the top, you'll see the 2 stations that we're adding, 7 and 8, and then the planned apparatus. Again, they are buying some equipment. We're only expecting the gross share to be approximately $2.9 million. Their total acquisition is about $4.3 million in apparatus items. So their gross share at the bottom right corner, you'll see is approximately 79% being funded by impact fees, some additional funding for those other items. So that's my final slide, sorry. Glad to go back and answer questions. We have the detailed report. I have my spreadsheets. Anything you want to know, now's the time.
Mr. President,
Ms. Milo.
thank you for this. This report was a lot easier to follow than the full report. I guess my biggest question is like regarding police going down so much. That to me, that seems kind of dramatic, and the only 59% being covered by the growth. And who decides if it's 59 or 79 or 89% that should be covered by the growth? Where do those numbers come from, or are they just?
They came by documenting our current levels of service. We inventoried the buildings that we have for the police department and allocating those to the number of service units in the community today, which are the residents and the non-resident. And for the non-residential, it's vehicle trips to development within Meridian. And so that, based on that current relationship of the amount of building space that we have today to the amount of service units, that's how we projected that out into the future to show what the growth need is and compared that to their planned expenditures. And so the growth share is based on the current service levels being maintained by impact fees. And then the reason that doesn't cover all of it is that the police department is, over the next 10 years, wanting to do some things that are just a little more than the growth share. Part of that's just the lumpiness of capital improvements, like the build a whole station, and so there's a big increase in level of service. So part of it is just that kind of stair-step kind of pattern that you get, and how they're planning to do their improvements over the next 10 years.
President Board.
Mr. Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie, for your presentation. Got one question. My concern is very similar to Councilwoman Milam's. Can you go over one more time how the allocation between parks, police, and fire were figured?
Basically, all of them were, back to this slide here, we talked about the method that we used.
Right.
The incremental expansion method is basically taking a snapshot of the way things are today, documenting current levels of service for each one of the items listed in that column. So we actually inventoried the amount of parks that we have, the acres, inventoried the size of the recreation center, documented the floor area for the police buildings, the floor area of the fire stations, and got their inventory of the rolling stock. So we documented the current levels of service, and those levels of service we use to project the need to accommodate growth over the next 10 years. And that's how each of the fees is done.
Mr. President, I guess I understand the methodology. My only resistance to that is the extreme fast growth that we've had over the last 5 years since impact fees were established last, and since maybe the last building was built, since we're only talking about infrastructure, that our level of service is down in some areas compared to where it was or should be. I can't, I'm not saying that as a fact that they're lower. I'm assuming that they're lower because we have the same buildings and 30,000 more people. So adopting something that's just going to maintain the current, which is inadequate because of the fast growth, just seems a little wrong.
Do you want me to answer that? I thought you were going to
Sure.
jump in. Okay. You can increase levels of service, and in fact, that's kind of what we're showing that we're planning to do with each one of the comprehensive financial plans. But we just have to do that with other revenue sources. And so even though the impact fees only growth should cover $28.8 million of improvements, we're actually going to spend $36 million worth of improvements. So the level of service will go up if we follow this comprehensive financial plan. It's just you can't do it from impact fees. You have to add $7.3 million worth of other revenues. And that's part of what we looked at with finance folks to make sure that we could do that from sales taxes or our property taxes or other revenue sources.
Mr. President. Mr. Kavanagh. Guthrie, the report that the clerk provided us, thanks again, Chris, on Friday was very, very enlightening. To Councilmember Milam's point, not exactly light reading, but really, really insightful. I did have some questions, though, about where the factors of growth came into play and how those were derived.
Okay.
And I think that it gets to Councilmember Milam's question is, as long as I've lived in Meridian, we've been growing, like crazy. And I think the concerns are that it seems every expert that kind of predicts what our growth rates are going to be always underestimate. And help me understand where those numbers come from. And obviously, I know it's hard to project out 10 years, and that's probably why there's a 1% there. But give me some understanding about where those numbers came from and how they're derived.
Sure. At the back is in Appendix A is the land use assumptions. I'm looking at the draft report that's dated March 28th of 2019.
I'm looking at figure A1, annual development projections.
Right.
For all
And that's
the
my
watching
summary
at home.
table that's got population, housing units, all the
Yes.
critical factors. On the residential side, I think staff has been doing a very good job of tracking those, and we're pretty comfortable on the residential. For the non-residential, I think we relied on Compass, your local kind of regional planning agency, as one of the main drivers for those. I'm trying to look myself in the actual details.
And Mr.
Go ahead.
President, if I can, I think maybe the point where I'm trying to get is maybe you can give me some guidance, because you're an expert when it comes to this. When projections are under the reality or over the reality, what are the appropriate steps for a local council to do in response? Is it to convene another group with a new set of recommendations? Is it look at this on an annual basis? I mean, what are the best practices for cities?
Well, in a lot of ways, the impact fees are self-adjusting, in that if your development happens faster, you just accelerate your capital improvement program. So the amount per unit is correct. It's just that you're getting units faster, so you need to accelerate your capital improvement program. So staff kind of monitors that and can do that as the timing when they bring things forward. If things are very much out of whack or cost change greatly, then you can update your study faster than the 5-year mandatory cycle, which Todd mentioned is an option. But a lot of ways, the impact fees actually are self-adjusting. So the rate's not necessarily off. If we just said, here's our capital improvements, and we're going to divide by the projected amount of development, then it's more problematic. But the methodology that we've used to basically document our current levels of service and just projecting out the need, it minimizes that kind of problem. So,
Thank you. Mr. President, one more, if I may. And if I missed it in here, my apologies, but I didn't see any part that contemplates inflation. And
correct.
What is the reason why I ask? It seems we're in budget season, and so I hear time and time again, we've got to buy it now because it's going to cost us more next year. We've got to buy it now because it's going to cost us more 3 years from now. Why is inflation not contemplated, and what are best practices again for council to look at that?
Yeah, the reason is that basically if you're going to project changes in cost, and you have to also project changes in revenues and everything else. And so it's best to kind of basically do things as they are today, our current levels of service, our current cost factors. Some communities do consider annual adjustments to the impact fees where they look at basically some kind of index like the one by Engineering News Record or a consumer price index, things, some kind of construction kind of index as one possibility of doing that. But that's probably a legal thing that we should talk about, though, whether that's a good idea or not. It's usually a fine thing to do. You just don't want to do it automatically. You want council actually consider it and enact it every time you do that. The danger is you just don't want to set it on autopilot and have it happen.
I agree.
So.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I have one more question. And I don't know if you want to go back to the slide of that was talking about the population per household.
Sure.
And did you say those were based on national numbers or those are Idaho numbers? Because based on those numbers, like there's no average even in a 3,500 square foot, 4,000 square foot house that even has 4 people in it.
We have 4 people in ours.
Yeah, these are averages for very specific to Meridian. They're areas of 100,000 people, and that's almost your population exactly. They don't draw the area that are called public use microdata areas, PUMS areas. They don't draw it based on Meridian's boundary, but they match up very closely in your case. And then we do adjust the control totals to Meridian actual numbers. So we know the actual number of persons, residents, and we're dividing it by the entire housing stock. And so there's really 2 different options. You can do persons per household, which is an occupied unit, but then you have to assume vacancy rates and all those kind of things. And so this is number of residents divided by the entire housing stock, which we call housing units. And it's a simpler methodology. You don't have to worry about seasonal folks and all that type of thing. And it generally is the best method to do. So we have good count of housing units, we have a good count of residents, and we have the good sample sizes, which are documented in the very back. There's some tables in the very back with that information. But it is Meridian specific for your community.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Council, any other questions at this point? Or I don't know if Matt wants to come forward and talk a little bit about the committee's process as well and what they're working on.
He was hoping not to talk, but I think he will.
Matt, thanks for being here. We'll put you on the hot seat because it's a good group on that committee, and you've gone through a lot of work and a lot of meetings in trying to facilitate this and probably ask a lot of the questions that we're asking up here. So give us a snapshot of the work of the committee that culminated in this report.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a great group. It's a good cross-section. Different ages, different professions, many different perspectives on this group. So all of these questions have come up. I would say that, so I've been on the committee from the the report that was done 7 years ago, 8 years ago. Okay, 5 years ago. Then I did the update a couple years ago, and then we're doing this one. And every time we had a good process. We had good people looking at it. And because we went through the process, we did this presentation, and it went to a hearing, it always kind of had a good outcome, a positive outcome, because we were funding these projects. I've really enjoyed working with everybody on that committee, and the staff has been tremendous as well. I would say, and all of our committee members agree, the process with Raftelis was dramatically improved over the previous process. Their professionalism, how thorough they are, their accuracy was a huge, huge improvement. So you have a far better report in front of you than you did 5 years ago. Our opinion as a committee is it's accurate, it's thorough, it addresses the needs of the Parks, Fire, and Police, and it is fair to people buying homes and people building homes and businesses. After many quarterly meetings over a few years and asking all these questions, we voted unanimously to support this report and send it to council for consideration. So our group was 100% on board with it. And we always look to the fire chief and the police chief and the parks director to make sure they're giving us the nod. And in that group, they're comfortable, finance is comfortable, and then all of our committee members are comfortable. So it was terrific. Great process. And these are good questions. I'm not the expert like Dwayne, so I don't want to dive in on details, but the police question, if you were building a new police station every 8 miles and you ended up wanting to build police station 6 and police station 7, you'd see their number way high. But they don't do that. And impact fees don't buy police cars, and they don't put cops in uniforms. So it's a different animal, and I think it looks like they're not being funded, but because of the nature of the service they provide, they don't have as many buildings, and they don't have vehicles that last 10 years. So that, I think, for me, that's kind of how I look at that specifically. But that's kind of my prepared thoughts or comments. I'm happy to answer any questions and visit with you as long as you want.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. It's good to hear the feedback of the committee and their ultimate conclusion and recommendation and the work that led up to it. Council, any questions of Mr. Adams?
Being here.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate
thanks.
it.
Appreciate it. So council, here's the ask before us. It sounds like an acceptance of the report and the work that's been done sets in process the future public hearing, additional input from the public in our community, allowing us to make a decision whether we want to adopt the full recommendation of impact fees or do something different. So acting tonight, which might have been something, I might have thought it was a little different. So approving the report tonight, I guess we could do, or we can table it a week, chew on it. Again, that is only the first part of a two-part process. So what's your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mr. Kavanaugh.
I know Matt sat down, but a question did pop up that I think will at least help us for kind of future planning. I'm sorry, we're notorious for you sitting down and I bring you back up. Matt, did the committee have a recommendation for a timeline for implementation should the council approve a recommendation or some variety thereof?
Good question. Council President, Councilman Kavanaugh, we, having, almost everybody on the committee went through the update that occurred a year or two ago, recently. When we looked at the CIP from the different departments, looked at the report, we felt it was critical that it be adopted quickly and implemented quickly in order to capture growth that is occurring right now that's driving the need for these improvements. So I think we would all want it to occur as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Lavoy, you might have something to add to that.
I do, Councilman Kavanaugh. We do have a process that we need to implement on the building side to accept this new structure. So we do have some lead time that we need based on your guidance and your approval. If it is the new approved distribution approach, we need to do some programming on the computer side. So again, we do need some lead time. Yes, we do want to make the rates effective as soon as possible, but we would be still comfortable with even an October 1 new fiscal year date if that is comfortable with you guys. Again, we need to figure out the programming timeline. We'll communicate that with you guys, but as soon as we can get it, we'll do it. But we do need some lead time on programming the system, getting all the building department staff set up, getting the documents and everything set forth. And we've had them in our communications. They've been part of the committee meetings. They've approved this approach that it is doable. They just need some programming time. So as much as we want to go as fast as we can, please work with us and allow us to get the system set up so our community, our development community doesn't have any issues when we first turn this key on.
Mr. President, just one question. Is this, has this plan been presented to different stakeholder groups that would be affected by these changes in fees?
Great question, Mr. Burke. We have presented this document to BCA 30 days ago, and we have also asked our Realtor Group representative to present it to them as well when we gave this document or published this document 30 days ago. I see Mr. Jorgensen is here, so I don't know if he has, I'm not sure if they've drafted any comments, but again, we have communicated the actual draft to those two agencies over the last 30 days.
Questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Palmer.
is it in here, or is there an easy way to calculate where we would be at if we did nothing, but based on the projected growth? If we didn't change the fees?
You have to be able to forecast the size of the houses.
If we kept the methodology and the fees as they are, but based on the projected growth, what the revenue differences would be?
Mr. Palmer, we do not have in here, if you kept the rates at, in this, I'm not sure if it's showing on your screen, $223 in this example. We did not take the math and multiply that against the 12,466 homes that we're projecting. We did not do that in this document for you. We're presenting to you a report and a fee structure that we believe is necessary for the next 10 years.
Mr. President?
Mr. Palmer.
And I don't fault you for that at all. That was the only easy one, I think, to calculate. The rest had a few extra factors that were harder to do than based on, I guess, what I saw in the report or on the slideshow. Because I do believe that whatever it is that we are planning to do is what we need to be charging for to be able to pay for. And that could start to vary as soon as this year's budget cycle, or when the majority of us that sit up here are no longer here, as early as next year. That may change again. And so I think knowing where we are at if we don't do anything different based on what the projection is, or what's being proposed based on what the projection is, and based on what our habits have been, I think would be a useful tool to help us in the decision. Because if it's, massive millions of dollars more than what we would collect anyway, then I think it really helps us take a look at ourselves and what we're going to do over this budget cycle that we're in right now, as to whether we're actually on the path to really wanting to build out that many things, knowing that we're going to also have to maintain them. And then also with that, do you, it's probably in one of my reports from you somewhere, know what, if we were to take the 3%, whatever, I know it's different, to be able to maintain all of the things that all of our other revenue sources have to be used to maintain those, do we know that if we were to build out everything possible planned in this 10-year proposal and maximize all possible other revenue sources to maintain those things, do they equal? Would we be able to actually do it?
Mr. Palmer, I'll answer the second question first. The comprehensive financial plan will be delivered to you this month to answer that question. If we did everything on the CFP, what does it look like, and can we fund it? As I've presented to you in the past, we've always balanced 5 years, but the second 5 years we don't balance. So again, that report will be presented to you later this month. To answer the first question about the fees, please note that, as Mr. Adams said and Mr. Guthrie said, these approaches are to be fair and proportionate based on the state code that we must calculate so that we don't overcharge. So in the police example, or even on this example here, $223 is the current police fee. We're proposing $152. By law, we would not want to charge $223 because that's not the correct proportionate share that we would charge a police impact fee. So to leave it as is, we would not suggest that to you because that would be violating the state code, because we're not being fair and proportionate based on our future growth. So to answer the question, what if we kept the rates the same, wouldn't recommend that, because for the ones that are going down, would be violating the state code that we're not doing a fair and proportionate share of the necessary development in the future. The ones that are, the fees that are going up, again, you would lose money in that situation because then you would be collecting less than what's allowable with the full cost recovery and the fair proportionate share. So hopefully that, I'm not sure if that answered or confused it more, but it's one that we can't really just keep the rates the same to do so. We have to follow the state code and the proportionality and the fairness that Mr. Guthrie and Mr. Adams spoke about.
Mr. President.
Mr. Palmer?
And completely understanding I mean, that's the reason we would look at, if you change this or do this, negative results may be this, it's still useful data. You can never have too much data. Understanding that, obviously, that's one that clearly has to change for legal reasons, but just kind of as a control factor of, if nothing changed, this is where we would be, and then we can continue to play with numbers and either plan to keep with our habits or see if we need to make some adjustments, especially knowing now that we're going to have a massive additional amount of information coming in the next month, and your request to, or I guess that it'd be okay to take our time while you work on other things on your end. I think it would be incumbent upon us to at least wait, a week or more, ideally, until we have the report from Todd a month from now.
I think it might be helpful just to go back to the summary slide that I have on the screen there, number 4. Just kind of comparing totals, adding parks, police, fire, to the proposed total increases for residential. The proposed total increases for non-residential. The new fees will generate more revenue than your old fees. So just because the police fee went down doesn't mean like all add them all together. You actually generate more from residential and you'll generate more from non-residential. So the overall is an increase in revenue. It's not a decrease. I just want to make sure that's clear. I think we got stuck on that. We shouldn't have stopped on the police slide because that was the negative one. The other ones are, so in cumulative, there is more revenue will be generated by the fee update. And it's something that the state really requires you to do, that you have to document all this good stuff and base the fees on that. You can't just say what our other communities charging or what, we want to stick with our current fee schedule. We really need to keep it update and follow the state statute. And so this is our recommendation, that you make the adjustments that we're proposing.
So council, the ask before you is, do you want to adopt or accept the report, which you could do today by motion, setting in process the future public hearing, vetting and discussion that might get less into the methodology, but perhaps more into the consequences of the ultimate dollar figure picked? So,
Mr. President, well, based on this is a report that's been thoroughly provided and vetted and I think approved from the stakeholders that are going to be affected by this, I have no problem accepting it the way it is, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it.
Ms. Milam?
Mr. Ward? Mr. Ward?
Sure.
I would tend to, before I personally would be comfortable accepting this report, I would like to hear from the public, in a public testimony, in a public hearing, to just hear what they have to say, maybe hear from the stakeholders group and the realtors and the builders and get their feedback as well before I would be comfortable, accepting the report in full this evening. So that's what I would like.
That would be the next process, right, Mr. President?
Yes, yeah. As I understood it, accepting the report doesn't adopt the fee or.
Right.
Okay.
It makes a public hearing.
Correct. It just starts the process, which will be public hearing, gathering of input from all the affected parties, future open meetings that.
Yeah, Mr. President, I think Mr. Nair can confirm or deny this. I'm just looking for an acceptance of this report so I can publish a public hearing so the public has a document to base their comments on, so they come to you. My comments are based on this document that you're presenting to the community. If I don't have a document to present to them in some form or fashion, I think that might have confusion, but I'll let Mr. Neri confirm or deny that for guidance.
Mr. President, members of the council, no, I would agree. All you're doing is accepting that the work has been completed to prepare this report. And then this can then be published to the public, so they have the opportunity to comment, and then we'll schedule it for a public hearing 3 weeks out,
Yep.
2 weeks out, so that you can then have that. You could have one hearing or multiple hearings, depending on what feedback you get.
Mr. President?
Thank you. Mr. Cavanagh?
Question then maybe for Mr. Lavoy. I think I'm hearing from a couple council members that maybe they want to hear from the public about the report, and I don't know if the questions would be questioning the methodology or concern about the numbers or what, but have we heard from any stakeholder who has voiced any concern or objection to the report? Is there anyone who has questioned the validity of the data or anything along those lines that we need to be aware of?
Mr. Kavanagh, I have personally, as the administrator, have not received any comments from BCA or realtors, but I have also not allowed them to present the comments to you yet. We have not had the public hearing.
Sure.
So we've presented the documents for them to read and digest. We still need to have the public hearing that will allow them to then present to you a formal comment for you to consider, and then we can discuss whether or not you wish to make changes based on the comments, i.e. the public hearing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Any other questions from council, or is there a motion to take some action and get public process started?
Mr. President,
Ms. Mylum?
I move that we approve the Meridian impact fee update as presented.
Or accept.
Accept, not approve. Accept. Received.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to accept the impact fee study report as presented today. Any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh?
I just want to explain my vote. I'm going to support the motion. Appreciate the great work of the committee and staff. As a brand-new council member 6 years ago, I think we got presented with this information, and it was a little daunting. And I feel much more confident in understanding a lot of the information that's been presented to us. I thought the report was great, and the presentation was really, really valuable. Clearly, I think like the rest of our body, want to wait to hear from the public and stakeholders, their thoughts and comments. They provide a different perspective. And so just because I'm supporting the acceptance of the report doesn't necessarily mean that I'm in full support of implementing the recommended fees. I think like many struggle with wrapping my head around this shift between a kind of one-size-fits-all versus based on square footage. I still want to wrestle with that a little bit. So appreciate the good work, and I'm happy to support the motion.
Mr. President?
Mr. Palmer?
And to mostly echo Councilman Cavanagh, I think it's critical that we remember that even though this motion is going to be approved, that the entire thing is up for further debate and learning, especially from those affected. I have no clue whether the development community would love the methodology or hate the methodology or love or hate the numbers. I don't know. I imagine if you exclusively built residential homes that were 3,201 square feet and larger, that you might not be pumped about this. Whereas if you maybe built some that were 1,001, but were on the edge, you might just start building exclusively 1,000 or less. I don't know. So I look forward to receiving that commentary, for them being allowed to share it with us. I believe that this is a legislative issue, not a quasi-judicial, so I would imagine that we would be able to have off-the-record discussions and opportunities to learn more of those things. Am I right? So please provide us all the information you want, whether it's in a public hearing or not, so that we have the best possible chance of making the right choice when it does officially come before us.
Any other discussion? Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer? Aye. Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye. Thank you, and thank you again for the good work and just getting the process started, and we look forward to some public input from everybody involved, and see where this goes. We're going to move on to item 11B. 11B, a public hearing for Night Hill Center subdivision. It's a short plat application. We will begin tonight with some staff comment.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. First project before you this evening is a short plat for 1.61 acres of land located in the CG zoning district at the corner of West Chinden and North Linder Boulevard at 6343 North Linder Road. In 2013, the City Council approved a preliminary plat consisting of 5 commercial lots and 1 common lot. The final lot was then approved in 2014. In 2016, a short plat for Night Hill subdivision number 2 was approved to split one of those original 5 commercial lots into 2. The proposed short plat consists of 2 building lots on 1.61 acres of land and is a re-subdivision of Lot 5, Block 1 within that existing subdivision. Written testimony was received from Rennie Wiley, the applicant, in agreement with the staff report. Staff is recommending approval with conditions in the staff report, and we'll stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions?
I have none.
This is a public hearing. Is the applicant here? Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Go ahead and state your name for the record.
Rennie Wiley, 1676 North Clarendon, Eagle, Idaho. Mr. President, members of the council, we are bringing this short plat subdivision to you to create 2 lots out of 1. So we're taking a 1.6 acre parcel and creating a 0.6 and a 1 acre parcel. Excuse me. We feel that this will give us more flexibility in marketing on this property, as we've had a lot of potential users that it's just too large for as it currently exists. We agree with staff conditions, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have so.
Okay, thank you much. Council, any questions?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else? Well, first, has anyone signed up?
Only the applicant signed in.
I assume that might be the case. Anyone here that wishes to provide some testimony on this application? No?
Mr. President, move that we close the public hearing on item 11B.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the item, public hearing on 11B. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed.
Mr. President,
Ms. Mylum.
I move that we approve H2019-0043.
It's been moved and seconded to approve H2019-0043. Any discussion? If not, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt? Aye. Councilmember Palmer? Aye. Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye. Thank you. Item 11C, it's a continued public hearing from April 2nd for Stapleton subdivision, southwest corner of Meridian Road and Harris Street. It's an annexation and zoning. We'll begin this application with staff comment as well. Mr. Parsons.
Mr. President, we're waiting for staff member to
Right.
get here to present that application. I believe she's on her way now, so she'll get you the necessary hearing outlining, and we'll get underway. Thank you.
Good cover.
Sing us a song while we wait.
Hi, Sonia.
Apparently there's more of a lag in the live system than I realized.
No worries. We couldn't start without you, so introduced it and that's it. So,
All righty, thank you. The next applications before you are a request for annexation and zoning, preliminary plat, and a variance. Staff is recommending the variance is either withdrawn or vacated from the agenda if council deems appropriate, based on a letter received from ITD that seems to grant approval of the proposed access via State Highway 69. This site consists of 35.67 acres of land. It's owned RUT in Ada County and is located at the southwest corner of West Harris Street and South Meridian Road, State Highway 69. This property was part of a larger area, as shown there, which included the property to the south that was part of an application that amended the future land use map to change the land use designation from medium-density residential to mixed-use regional for the overall property. An annexation application was also approved, however, the development agreement was never signed, so the property was never annexed, and the approval has since expired. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation for this property is mixed-use regional. The applicant is requesting annexation and zoning of 38.15 acres of land with an R15 zoning district, a preliminary plat consisting of 213 building lots and 22 common lots on 35.67 acres of land, and a variance to UDC 11-3H-4B for access via State Highway 69. The site is proposed to develop with a mix of residential uses consisting of 212 single-family residential units, 96 attached and 116 detached, and 28 multifamily residential units in 7 fourplexes for a total of 240 residential units at a gross density of 6.73 units per acre. A concept bubble plan shown there on the left was submitted that depicts how the site is proposed to develop and how the adjacent property owner to the south plans to develop the adjacent property with a mix of office, multifamily residential, and commercial uses. The overall mix of uses planned for this area is consistent with that desired in the mixed-use regional designation. And although staff would prefer to see a higher density in this area because of its proximity to a major transportation corridor, State Highway 69, the density which falls at the low end of the 6 to 40 units per acre desired in mixed-use regional areas is within the desired range at 6.73 units per acre. There is a north-south collector street designated on the master street map, and that's shown there on the map on your right, across this site that was intended to provide access between Harris Street and Amity Road. This designation was placed on this property in 2008 when the future land use map amendment to mixed-use regional was approved because of the intensity of uses planned with the associated development and the need to disperse traffic to the existing and future signals at Harris and State Highway 69 and Amity and State Highway 69. The street was intended to serve as a backage road for the commercial development along State Highway 69 as required by the UDC. And that was the development plan that was shown at the time when the comp plan was amended. However, the property was never annexed and the property wasn't developed as intended. The proposed plat depicts a short segment of the collector street at the north boundary from Harris Street to the first intersection, and that would be this area right here. And at the southern boundary from State Highway 69 to the north to the first intersection, and that is right here, and then to the south boundary for future extension. Staff and ACHD agree that the construction of 2 discontinuous collector streets does meet the intent of the master street map and doesn't preclude construction of the southern segment in the future and makes sense in the absence of the previous development plan. One access is proposed at the north boundary via West Harris Street, a collector street, and one full access is proposed via State Highway 69, although ITD is only in support of the right-in, right-out, left-in access. A collector stub street is proposed at the south boundary for future extension. Staff is requiring access to be provided to the west to the future multifamily development where none is currently proposed in accord with the comprehensive plan, which encourages interconnectivity between developments, and the UDC, which requires local street access to be provided to any use that currently takes direct access from a collector street. And in this case, that would be Harris Street. So that is referring to this orange property right here. And there is no specific development plan for that property at this time, but there is a concept plan approved for multifamily residential, and there is no access available to this site except for the Harris Street, Collector Street connection. The UDC prohibits new approaches directly accessing a state highway, State Highway 69. Public street connections are only allowed at the section line road and at the half-mile mark between section line roads. However, council may consider and apply modifications to these standards upon specific recommendation of the Idaho Transportation Department. In this case, a variance was submitted with the original application for access via State Highway 69, but since that time, comments have been received from ITD that include conditions of approval that seemingly grant approval of the access. The council should determine if this is sufficient for approval of the access without a variance. If so, the variance request should either be withdrawn or vacated. The plat is proposed to develop in 5 phases, as shown, with the first phase dependent on access via State Highway 69. The second phase will have access via Harris Street, followed by the third phase at the corner of Harris and State Highway 69, and the fourth phase directly west of Phase 1. The fifth phase will be the multifamily residential development, which will require approval of a conditional use permit. The applicant proposes the following improvements with each phase. Phase 1, the State Highway 69 South Meridian Road roadway improvements, a 10-foot wide multi-use pathway and street buffer landscaping along the full length of the project boundary along State Highway 69 and South Meridian Road. Phase 2, the West Harris Street roadway improvements, including curb gutter and detached sidewalk and street buffer landscaping along the full length of the project boundary along West Harris Street, and the installation of the traffic signal at the West Harris Street and State Highway 69 intersection. The applicant has since changed their proposal on the Phase 2 to install a traffic signal, with the second phase to instead, when traffic counts require it, as directed by ITD and ACHD, and they would pay 25% of the construction costs. Prior to issuance of any certificate of occupancies in each of these phases, the associated improvements as proposed by the applicant are required to be completed. If council doesn't approve the access from the state highway, the Harris Street improvements, including the signal, are required to be completed with Phase 1. The traffic impact study would need to be updated to reflect the new trip distribution and volumes. The preliminary plat will also need to be revised and reconfigured to remove the access, and a new phasing plan would need to be submitted. A minimum of 10% or 3.57 acres of qualified open space and 2 site amenities are required for this development. The applicant proposes open space and site amenities in excess of the minimum required. A total of 13.9% or 4.95 acres of qualified open space is proposed, consisting of half the street buffer along the highway, the buffer along collector streets, a few parkways, common areas containing pathways, a small dog park, and a half-acre central common area. Site amenities consist of a segment of the city's multi-use pathway system within the northwest pipeline corridor at the southwest corner of the site, a multi-use pathway within the street buffer along the highway, a park with children's play structures consisting of a 24-foot by 36-foot play structure, swings, climbing dome, rock climbing boulders, basketball court, big wheel track, and seating area with 4-foot tall wrought iron fencing with a gated entry surrounding the park for children's safety, and a dog park for small dogs with seating areas. A 6-foot tall concrete fence on top of a 4-foot tall berm, 10 foot above the center line of Meridian Road, State Highway 69, is proposed as shown in accord with UDC standards for residential developments adjacent to state highways. The Carlson lateral runs along the west boundary of this site and has been piped. The easement for the lateral is outside of adjacent building lots. The Northwest Gas Pipeline runs across the southwest corner of this site and lies within a 75-foot wide easement contained in a common lot. Because the narrow lots, approximately 32 feet wide for detached homes and associated driveways, there is not adequate room for on-street parking in front of those lots for guest parking. And in some areas, parking is quite a ways away. Where attached homes are proposed, there is room for approximately 1 space per every 2 lots for on-street parking. On-street parking is also available adjacent to common lots. The applicant has submitted a parking exhibit here that shows the availability for guest parking, which amounts to approximately 109 spaces available for guest parking. Conceptual building elevations and photos were submitted for the proposed single-family residential attached and detached units and the multifamily structures, as shown. The single-family attached and multifamily structures are required to comply with the design standards in the Architectural Standards Manual. Structures adjacent to West Terrace Street and State Highway 69 are proposed to all be single-story in height, except for those on lots 60 and 62, Block 1, which will be 2 stories in height. The Commission recommended approval of the subject application, the annexation and zoning, and the preliminary plat. I'll just go through a summary of the Commission hearing. Those that testified in favor are as follows: Deb Nelson, Ronnie Wilkes, Debbie Jeske, Dennis Green, Brandon Whalen, Hawkins Companies, Andrew Newland, Randy Nelson, Will Dillmore, Brittany Elliott, and Carol Daly. No one testified in opposition or commented. Written testimony was received from Kimberly Porter, Evan and Annalyn Frazier, Sandy and Randy Nelson, and Will Dillmore. Most of the comments were from happy home buyers and other developments by the same applicant and builder, and the need for housing options in the price point offered by this developer. Key issues of discussion by the Commission are as follows: timing for installation of a traffic signal at the Harris Street State Highway 69 intersection, previous ITD approved accesses for the site via State Highway 69, proposed variance for access via State Highway 69, the provision of a local stub street to the property to the west planned for multifamily development as recommended by staff and required by the UDC unless otherwise waived by council, revisions to the phasing plan if access from the state highway isn't approved, and fire department's requirements for curbs to be painted red in addition to no parking signs installed where parking is only allowed on one side of the street. Commission made the following changes to staff recommendation. They removed the requirement for the rear of structures visible from Harris Street and the highway to have varied setbacks to avoid monotonous wall planes. And they directed the applicant to work with the fire department on whether or not curbs needed to be painted red, in addition to the no parking signs, where parking is only allowed on one side of the street. The fire department has since changed that requirement to only require no parking signs and not curb paint. Outstanding issues for council tonight. Staff is recommending condition number A2E and A3G in section 8 are amended to require a local street connection rather than just a vehicular connection to the future multifamily development property to the west in accord with UDC 11383 unless otherwise waived by council. That section of code states that all subdivisions must provide local street access to any use that currently takes direct access from an arterial or collector street. And last, council should determine if ITD's letter is adequate for approval of the proposed access via State Highway 69. If so, the variance request should be withdrawn or vacated. The only written testimony received since the commission hearing was a letter from the applicant, Laren Bailey, and I'll just let him go over his comments with you. Staff will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Sonia. Council, any questions? Would the applicant like to come forward? Or the applicant's rep? Welcome, Deb. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I had a presentation I'd like to pull up before I get started here. Are you going to drive to pull that up for me, Sonia, or? Do you
Go
know?
ahead and give us your name and address
Thank
to get
you.
us kicked off.
Deborah Nelson with Givens Pursley. My address is 601 West Bannock in Boise, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Stapleton Development Team, who are also here in case I need any additional details. Since Sonia's done a good job of going through a lot of this, I'm going to try to stick to the highlights. A couple additional points on the location that we really like. It's close to Roaring Springs, Wahoo's, the Majestic Theater, and various shopping opportunities, also close to schools and parks. Also, this location provides a nice transition between the residential to the north and west, which includes one R40 piece, but also a lot of larger single-family lots, and the future mixed-use commercial to the south and non-residential mixed-use to the east. Looking at the site plan, Stapleton has a really thoughtful design and arrangement to achieve the density that the city staff really wanted to see and to be consistent with your comprehensive plan, which asked for a minimum of 6 units per acre, and still provide that quality neighborhood that Meridian citizens want. We've got the mixed use, which is fourplex townhomes up in the northeast, adjacent to the R40 zoning. Single-story attached product is along the perimeter on the north and east side, so that there's always an attractive visual of the development from the external streets. And then the 2-story detached is located in the center. There's a centrally located large neighborhood park with additional passive and active open space spread throughout the development, in particular with the regional pathways. Landscaped boulevards really accent the entrances on both ends of the development, and there's landscaping along all of the end units, so it's always attractive when you're driving into each end point. There's 3 types of residential products that are all for sale. As I've already mentioned, the single-family detached. These are 2 stories and range from about 1,350 to 1,850 square feet. The single-family attached that are along the perimeter of the existing streets, these are great for mature empty nesters or a little smaller. And then the multifamily townhomes, which we expect will be 4 units, each to their own, 4 plexes, 28 units in 7 buildings. They'll each have their own external access, which is a nice feature. But all of that will be determined in a conditional use permit. We come back for those details. There's a lot of high demand for the quality and price point of these homes in your city right now. I think a lot of that success is driven by the quality of the amenities. And Sonia spent some time with this, so I'll be quick. We exceed the open space that per the code requirements, as she mentioned, but the city code doesn't even count all of the open space that we provide. So if you count all of the open space that's here, it's 6.9 acres or 19.3% of the development. So it's a very attractive place. The most important amenity, from a cost standpoint and the contribution to the city and the entire area, in my opinion, is these regional pathways. We've got a 10-foot regional pathway along the southwest, along the Williams Pipeline, and then one along the entire eastern border along Meridian Road. In total, this is over 1,200 feet of regional pathways. That is a lot for a development of this size. That's going to provide connectivity for all of those residences I mentioned to the north and west to get down to the mixed use and commercial that's south of us. So it benefits not just our residents, but everybody around us. And then this large half-acre neighborhood park, which is just going to be great for these residents, with all of the amenities with the soccer field and the basketball court, the play structures. And with each of these amenities, there's just, again, thoughtful design about what residents want and what makes an attractive neighborhood. Here with the pathways and the bench seating, and also features like having a fence around the park to keep the toddlers safe from wandering out in the streets. Great pedestrian connectivity here. Stapleton has significant connections on all sides, more than a dozen connections for pedestrians on all sides of the development. Especially again with those regional pathways, this is going to be a very walkable development. Great parking is provided. It meets the city code with 2 spaces in garage, 2 spaces on the driveway, plus significant on-street parking. Given the significant roadway improvements and frontage improvements on a corner like this development's going to be phased in. But those improvements are going to be front-loaded. And so with the first phase, which is down in the southeast area, the entire improvements along the South Meridian Road will be done with that first phase. So even up against phase 3, that'll be finished with phase 1. Phase 2, similarly up in the northwest area, but all of the Harris Street improvements will be done all the way out to Meridian Road. So along phase 2 and phase 3, that'll all be done front-loaded with phase 2. And the Central Community Park will be done in phase 2. Phase 3 is up in the northeast, and then in the phase 4 is in the southwest when the regional pathway will be completed along the Williams Pipeline. So there's only 2 places where we are asking for a change to the staff recommended conditions, so I'd like to walk through those. First, staff has requested a vehicular connection to the west, and as you heard Sonia say tonight, she's clarifying that she really wants a local street connection to the west. That's the condition she's asking for. In prior development applications to the west, this Gray Cliff Estates, the city did not require that. Either between these portions of the R40 property and the subdivision there, or a local street to our property. The owner of that R4 property still is not asking for a local street connection to Stapleton. They just want an emergency connection, which we provide. That's that upper green arrow. The R40 property also has emergency access to the single-family portion of the Gray Cliff Estates, which is that lower green arrow. And it's the same owner and developer of both of those properties. So if the city now has determined that they want the R40 property to have a local street connection, then the appropriate place for that is in Gray Cliff. And that's for several reasons. The only place that this could be added into our design without their projects, trips exceeding our street capacities is along the collector segment at the north end. This means that it doesn't really gain any new connectivity or traffic dispersion because those trips are still going right up to Harris Street and they already have a direct connection to Harris Street, except what it does create is a cut through. It cuts right through the corner of our development. ACHD looked at that exact issue and specifically directed that the R40 traffic should connect directly to Harris, not to Harris through Stapleton. Further, the single-family portion of Gray Cliff Estates provides connection to multiple roadways, not just to Harris. They've got a connection to the west that goes to this new collector that will eventually connect all the way from Harris Street to Amity. They've got street connection to the south, street connection to the east going over to the future mixed-use and commercial retail area. And they've got that existing emergency access between the two that could be built upon. The Planning and Zoning Commission discussed this issue at length. They uniformly believe that staff's proposed street connection to Stapleton was a bad idea. They asked whether or not they could make that change in the recommendation, and they were told that they could not, that was a council-level decision. But they noted several times that they wanted that in the record to be communicated to the council. It's not clear that the UDC does require this particular local street connection. The code provision that Sonia referenced says all subdivisions must provide local street access to any use that currently takes direct access from an arterial or collector street. That use is not currently permitted or in existence, has been constructed. There is no conditional use permit for apartments, it's just zoned. But in any case, the more important part of that code provision to note is that it can be waived by city council. And so to the extent you think that applies, we are asking you to waive that. Staff did raise the concern that the pipeline company might want to limit the number of crossings, and that would be in between those two sections of Gray Cliff Estates. That shouldn't be an issue because there's already an emergency access required there, but to confirm, we did reach out to the pipeline company and asked if there was any limit on crossings, and they confirmed that there is not, and we did provide that response to staff. So we're asking for these staff conditions that all relate to this vehicular connection just to be clarified to require emergency access only, which we're happy to provide. Second condition of issue, it deals with the timing for the traffic signal at Harris. There is a condition of approval in staff proposed condition 1D that requires that we construct that signal with phase 2. ITD and ACHD control this intersection. They control the timing of when a signal can be built here. It is completely out of our control. What is within our control is contributing our fair share of the cost of that signal. And so both agencies recognize that this development is just but one of many contributors to the impacts of this signal. ACHD carefully analyzed the trips that we're generating compared to others and determined that our fair share is 25%, and they imposed a condition of approval for us to contribute that 25%, and we will do so. We just want to make sure that there's not a condition of approval coming out of the city that requires an impossible timing that we can't construct that signal before it has been warranted. We are asking for access to Meridian Road. We're asking the council to modify the access standards to allow access at the quarter mile. As a little history, and you heard some of this from Sonia, as part of the previous Hawkins project in 2012, 3 access points were approved along this stretch, which includes all of the property you see in this image here. The Stapleton development and the Hawkins portion remains to the south. That was approved by the City of Meridian and ITD. In fact, they were constructed pursuant to permits issued by ITD, so the access are currently there. Of the 2 access points that are on the Stapleton portion of this development, we're agreeing to forego one of them and asking for approval to continue using the one on the bottom. The southern end puts it centrally located and can serve our property and the Hawkins property. And this is necessary for our development. It allows us to disperse the traffic throughout on local streets so that we can achieve that density that the city desires and also that quality neighborhood and housing product that's in demand for the city. This access is also critical for the future commercial development to the south. I think this council is well aware of how important access points are for commercial development to successfully site on a project like this. ACHD approved that road layout with the access point. ITD carefully considered all of the traffic patterns and determined that access at that location was appropriate. They conditioned the access on right in, right out, left in movements and on construction of a median to safely navigate those movements, to protect those movements. And they also required construction of a southbound turn lane along Meridian Road. We are in agreement with all of the conditions imposed by ITD. Based on that ITD recommendation, you have the authority to approve this access by modification, and we would withdraw our variance request. The last slide here, just to summarize what we're asking you here, we do ask for approval of the applications and submitted in accordance with the staff report and all of the conditions, with the exception of the 2 that I identified already, clarifying that vehicular connection to the west is emergency only, and to strike that requirement to construct the signal at Harris with Phase 2. We will do that in accordance with the ACHD conditions. And we are asking for approval of the modification. We've had great positive neighbor comments. As you heard from the summary from the commission, we had 8 individuals testify in support and none against. That never happens to developments I'm working on, so it seems worth noting. And there were really nice comments about the great quality housing, the location, the price points, how the neighborhood feel, and the amenities. So, I mean, really exciting stuff that they've had success in your city and have now found a new great location for this project, and hope that you will agree and be in support. And I will hand out just that same last page, just so you have it in front of you, if you're inclined to approve, so that you have that in front of you when you make a motion, and I'll do that when I end, but I'd stand for any questions in the meantime.
Great, thank you, Deb. Council, any questions? Mr. Cavanagh.
Sorry, Dean. Dang it. I wanted a perfect batting score. Not going to happen tonight. Deb, thanks for being here. A couple just clarifying questions. As it pertains to the staff recommendation A2E, A3G, requiring that local street connection, when did staff communicate that to you? It sounded like from your testimony, like that at least somewhere through this process, that the requirement from staff for that to be a local street connection changed. I'm just curious about when that happened.
Councilmember President and Councilmember Cavanagh, we knew of staff's desire to have a vehicular connection there early on. That wasn't a surprise. I didn't mean to suggest that. I just was noting Sonia's comment this evening that she's changing the language from vehicular to local street. Did I capture what you said correctly there? Yes.
Great, appreciate it. One additional question. Deb, talk to me about the rationale behind having that beautiful park piece come in with Phase 2 as opposed to Phase 1. I just know that we hear all the time when, and it's not casting light on anybody, but we see something in a design, and then what actually gets built is something different. And I also know, as someone who moved into a neighborhood, how my kids wanted those amenities, right away. So help me understand why Phase 2 versus Phase 1.
Absolutely, Mr. President, Councilmember Cavanagh. It's a good question, but in the scale and the phasing that we have laid out here, there are significant improvements already front-loaded into Phase 1 and only 52 lots. And so it's a small number of lots carrying a large number of improvements already. There's also some feasibility with infrastructure of getting up to that park from the existing streets. And so it's designed and built within the phase that makes the most sense with the surrounding streets and infrastructure. And then the timing here, they're going to bring in each phase right at the end of the prior phase, with one phase coming in each season. And so before you've really got residents that are there enjoying first phase, the second one's already going to be close on its heels. And so it's going to be a short window. It does keep the construction of the park and amenities and all of that in the phase where the homes are also being constructed. It kind of segregates that impact, but then it's quickly brought online.
Mr. President, I'll piggyback on that question. So is the intent then to do those improvements at the beginning of Phase 2 or at the end of Phase 2? I say that maybe that could appease any conflict.
Councilmember President, Councilmember Milam, at the beginning.
Okay. Thank you. That's almost the end of Phase 1, right?
That's
It's
right.
the next day.
Council, any other questions of the applicant? Deb, I had one question on the facilitating the construction of the signalization on 69, Highway 69. Is the payment of that proportional share, does that occur in Phase 2, or is there some other trigger in the ACHD staff report as to when those funds are provided?
Mr. President, the ACHD condition requires that be paid prior to the final plat if we haven't already had a warrant that required construction.
Okay. Any other questions, Council? Okay, thank you much.
Okay. Pass this out for you.
Mr. Clerk, do we have any signups?
Mr. President, there are several. First is Dennis Green.
Members that signed up just want to be on record that they're in favor.
Yeah, so I think we caught you, but we're going to make you put on the record what you were trying to say. Go ahead and give us your name and.
Will Delmore, 5854 North Rose Point Place, Boise, 83713. The members that signed up just want to go on record that they're in favor. Individuals that signed up just want to go on record that they're in favor, as well as I am, but we're not able to stay and speak.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
And Mr. President, for the record, there were 5 signed in
Okay.
favor wishing to testify.
Okay. You want to go ahead and read those names that you've got?
I can do that. It was Dennis Green, Debbie Jeske, Ronnie Winks, Randy Nelson, and Brandon Whalen.
Great. Any of the names that were called that just changed their mind and now just want to make sure you got a shot to testify? Okay. Yes, sir. Come on forward. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Brandon Whalen. Address is 855 West Broad in Boise, Idaho. I represent Hawkins Companies. So we are absolutely in support of this application with Stapleton. As was stated earlier, we had a master site plan for a mixed-use regional commercial development, which also contained a housing element. As we negotiated the access issue with ITD and the city of Meridian, it kind of protracted out the approval process. And the major tenant that we had that would have been the anchor for the mixed-use regional retail center, we lost them to another property. And since then, the retail market has really been upended. So at this moment, we think that the Stapleton subdivision is a suitable use of the property. We have every intention of augmenting that with a mixed-use office, residential, and retail development. But as was stated earlier, the approval of ITD having that access point is crucial for us to have a successful and productive mixed-use regional type of development there on the property. So as stated earlier, we're absolutely 100% in support of this application. And I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you for being here and sharing that.
Council President Borton?
Mr. Byrne.
So to confirm, you are going to do office, retail, commercial, I'm not going to hold you to the exact layout of what was presented in this application, but, similar to that in the south?
Councilman President and Councilman Byrne, that's absolutely correct. We did put together a rough bubble plan
Right.
that did show those types of uses. And we have every intention of doing that, of having as intensely of a development as we can do, mixing maybe multifamily residential, office, and retail.
Follow up, President Moore?
Mr. Byrne.
Any reason why you wouldn't?
No, absolutely not. That was the intent when we purchased the property. As stated earlier, the retail world has kind of shifted, and so we're still trying to figure that out. But we are trying to find the highest and best use of that property so we meet the regional mixed use designation of the comprehensive plan.
Perfect. Council, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you again.
President Wharton, if I may, over here, Fire Marshal.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to let you, when we first saw this, I'm talking of police and I, first viewed this preliminary application, we had mentioned that having traffic cross Highway 69 to turn left out of Harris is a bad thing. Because it's not just their subdivision that's going to be utilizing Harris. You already have the subdivision to the north that's utilizing it. You also have the Kentucky Way area up to the northwest that is also utilizing this access point as well. And so that was one of the discussions that probably prompted the whole, we need a signal there, because it is too dangerous to pull out onto Highway 69 when that's a downhill slope right there in that particular section. At 55 miles an hour, it's going to be fatal. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as well.
With that discussion, were there any of your concerns that were left unresolved?
No. I think access, as far as, there's some things that lower access point in phase one will need to be installed, and then once we start getting through the phases, we'll make some accommodations for dead-end streets and stuff, and, I could work with Lyron on that. There shouldn't be any other problems, but for police and fire, that signal was crucial to this development.
Thank you. Council, any questions of staff in light of that? Okay. Any other members of the public that wish to testify? Yes. Welcome, come forward, and thanks for playing. And give us your name and address.
Hi, my name is Denise Levere. I'm at 6706 North Salvia Way in Meridian. And as we all know, we're right in the middle of a comprehensive plan. And part of our issue with south of I-84 is there is a sea of residential and not a lot of commercial and mixed use. So when we're looking at this, we really need to look at, is the mixed use designation fully being utilized the way it's supposed to? And right now, this appears to be just a one-use residential. The intent of mixed use is not being realized, and the bubble plan doesn't include more than 30 acres of future mixed use. Mixed use requires 3 types of land use, and this only has residential currently. There's no guarantee that the development will come in as promised that we're being submitted. So that's an issue. And per the staff report, it says right in there, per staff, project may not be as well integrated as desired by the comp plan. There's a requirement for quasi-public space or public space. This application doesn't meet it. Is there any guarantee that the other applicant will meet it, and do they want to bear the cost of that? Because you're basically shifting that cost off to them. There should be a collector road to Amity for livability, safety, and convenience. I'm not clear on there where you see that. The parking plan, as stated by the staff report, is inadequate and doesn't offer residents convenience and in some case reasonable access to parking. The application requires multiple exceptions to the city's plans, transportation corridors, multi-use development, open space, vehicle connectivity, and CUP without really raising the bar. When I look at the space in here for the open space, a half acre just doesn't seem adequate for the amount of properties that you're putting there. In addition, on the bubble plan, there's a multifamily unit that's going in there as well. So I have some concerns about just raising the bar. That was one of the things that we talked about. That's one of the things the mayor talked about, raising the bar. And, you know, I'm not 100% opposed to this. I just think we need to raise the bar. And there needs to be some commitment on here that there is going to be truly a mixed use as designated in here, and those components really are going to be met, and an understanding of who's going to pay for that quasi-public space and who's going to take care of that public space. I'm not hearing where that's at, and is that fair to push all that cost back off onto the other developer, and we don't even know if they're going to develop it. So, and I will say, in fairness, I have walked the properties over with Devco Development, and they are very conscious about when they put properties closer together, about making sure there's not light pollution and making sure that the quality of the product that I looked at was a good quality. I'm just thinking that we need to go back through and really raise the bar when we're doing an annexation.
Thank you, Denise. Council, any questions?
One question, or one comment, Denise. Denise, I had the same concern in regard to the property owner in the south. It almost makes that south to be able to meet the conditions of that, you know, the designation in that area. It almost makes it so that property owner in the south has to do some commercial and some office and some retail. And so, do you have any concern that the Hawkins representative, do you feel like you have any reason to believe that they're not going to come through with it? He just said he was going to promise.
That has already had a proposal once before, and the market changes, so there's no guarantees. It would be better if they were coming forward as a co-application, just as Costco's and Brighton came together as a co-application. They're going back through in a mixed-use designation and really honestly presenting a R15 with multifamily there. And so they're not really meeting the true spirit of the zoning without having Hawkins come in and doing a co-application and putting together a plan together. There's no guarantees. Things change.
One point of clarification, is the Hawkins property, has it been annexed yet? I'm not sure. It's not? Okay, so there's your guarantee.
There's no guarantee if it's not annexed.
Well, we can, as a council, we can give that direction.
And honestly, is it fair to Hawkins? I mean, if they want to stand up here and say that's going to be how they develop it, is it fair to them to pick up those additional costs?
Well, I would agree with your concern. Again, I think I had those, when I was reading, this application, I had those exact same concerns because it almost limits the Hawkins folks to what they can do on their land. I mean,
Yes,
they
they do.
basically have to do what they're saying they're going to do. And those are the reasons why I asked those questions.
Well, thanks for asking.
Yeah, so I think that I don't have any reason to believe that the Hawkins company's not going to do what they're saying they're going to do, personally. But I appreciate your concern.
Thanks, Denise. Anybody else present tonight that wishes to provide some testimony? If not, we'll have the applicant come back up for summary and some final questions.
Thank you, members of the council. Just a couple of quick items there to respond to. Yes, this is a residential project, but it has 3 different types of residential. Staff did a great job of walking through an enormous detail in the staff report about how this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the goals that are in there. And in part it is because of the surrounding mixed use and commercial designations on your future land use map. And not just the Hawkins property to the south, but also further south across Amity and east of the property is all mixed use, non-residential. And as was learned from the Hawkins project in 2012, the big box retail commercial that was going to take over this entire site wasn't feasible. The market has shifted, and so it makes more sense to have that smaller commercial with the interspersed residential and office like they're talking about, and then they get the benefit of our denser residential next door to support it with rooftops. There was comments about inadequate parking. As I covered in my presentation, we meet the city code on parking, and we also have on-street parking in addition to what the city code requires. Part of that is just supporting a dense development, which staff really wanted here, and your comp plan calls for, that you've got narrower lots, but there's still plenty of parking here. She also made the comment that there wasn't enough open space, but as we walked through, we exceed the standards in the code for qualified open space and have almost 20% overall. So I think those points are covered largely in my primary presentation, but I'd stand for any questions about them.
Thank you. Do you have council any questions?
Mr. President.
Ms. Little Roberts.
Sorry. Not on that, but Mr. President, Deb, back to the light. That really concerns me with the expression of our safety. Sounded like maybe it was further down the road rather than sooner. Do you have any feeling as things get going number-wise? It seems like sooner rather than later would be optimal, but I know you're only 25% of the cost of the light, and it now depends on ITD when it happens.
Mr. President, Councilmember Little Roberts, I appreciated that discussion, in particular President Borton's question of, were all of your concerns addressed when the agencies looked at this? Because they did impose requirements about when that signal can come in and who pays for it. And I appreciated the response that yes, they were, because the signal will be built when it is warranted. And so those safety concerns that are addressed will be addressed in a timely way. The signal just cannot come in before it is warranted. The agencies that control the roadway where the signal would go in have jurisdiction in determining when it comes in. And so they're going to determine that. When the warrants cause the signal to be built, it will be constructed.
Thank you. Follow up? Deb, did they give you any numbers like the road is at, the intersection is at this number, and when we get to this number is when it will be built, or and we think it'll take a year, we think it'll take 6 months?
Mr. President, Councilmember Little Roberts, yes, that was studied in the traffic impact study, which makes estimates about growth and background. So yes, they look at all those numbers of what they expect the growth numbers to come in around. And whenever a development, whether it's us or another development, triggers that warrant, they will have to construct the signal at that time. If it's not us, then we will have our 25% share that goes into that road trust that they will use. If it's us, then other people will have to pay us back.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. President.
Mr. Cavanagh.
I've got a question for staff, but I don't want Deb to have to sit down and then have to get back up. So I guess, Sonia, if you can, I'm still trying to wrap my head around in the staff report this requirement of a vehicle connection versus a local street connection. Help me understand the difference between the two and why the change.
Council, it's, the UDC requires a local street connection. That's the difference. A local street is a public street versus just a driveway connection. That's what the code calls for. It also allows for a council waiver to that requirement. I did ask for a change to that provision from just a vehicular connection to a local street because of that.
Thank you. Great.
Any other questions? I've got a couple for you. One, on that point, quite frankly, I agree with staff, and I appreciate your input in stating that the local connection applies. There might be unique circumstances, which I think you have quite frankly described, to warrant a waiver, unique to this situation that might grant it. But I think the fact that that adjacent property to the west hasn't yet developed doesn't eliminate the requirement. And I think when you look at what's the intent of that requirement, to try and ensure you've got those public street connections to pull accesses off of these arterials. My sense is that's why that requirement's there, and the fact that it's not built yet doesn't eliminate the purpose behind it. So I do think what you've described is a unique circumstance that warrants a waiver. In this case, maybe not in other cases, but so I appreciate the inclusion of the local street. On the access to Highway 69, it's not requested to be a full access. Is that correct?
Mr. President, that's correct. We are in agreement with ITD's condition that it be limited to 3 turning movements.
So just one question. What if you had requested full access and ITD said what they said, would we be allowed to grant full access without a variance? This is kind of a wonky question, but I was curious. When I first read it, I thought the request is for full access. ITD authorized something less, so would we even be authorized to grant full access in light of ITD's more limited approval?
Mr. President, I don't believe you could. ITD has jurisdiction over that roadway. And so if they limit us to 3 turning movements, that's all we can construct.
Okay. That makes sense. One other comment and one other question. I think the end cap landscape feature on this, and I've seen it in some other developments, is really a great way to soften the edges on. I think it's a great design. I've seen it done well in other developments in the community, and this is a good example of it. I also think that Denise brings up a good point with something we're challenged with, and you do a lot of land use development around the valley, but when you've got a kind of a blob, for lack of a better term, of a mixed-use regional area that is not constrained by the parcels themselves, she brings up a good point that we wrestle with. Granted, you have different types of residential, but it does seem to gobble up a large part of one type of what mixed-use regional, constraining the remaining parcels. How do you assist elected officials in reconciling the constraint we're placing on what we intend in that region as a whole?
Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, as you know, your plan is a guide. And particularly when you look at those big area, just those block designations like you see in that future land use map in that area, clearly you couldn't have all high intensity commercial on every single one of those corners in the sizes that they are and have that succeed. So in my opinion, and really, I mean, your staff are the planning experts on this, but in my experience of citing these, you have to think about the uses that make sense as they come in. And that's dictated a little bit by land ownership, right? And when a project is ready and a particular landowner sees that there's a good opportunity for their product, they're going to bring it forward, and you're going to look generally at your plan and see, does this make sense and generally comport? And that's the analysis that Sonia did in her staff report, to go through and determine why this use is appropriate and consistent with your plan. It does put a little bit of pressure on the subsequent properties if things are eaten up. I mean, I do think that's natural. But if you evaluate each one to say, yes, this makes sense, and here are the reasons it makes sense, that's why I kind of walked through, I think, that great transition from the larger lot, single family that's north and west, to the commercial that's to the south of us, and in particular with no residential being anticipated currently in your plan to the east. You've got a lot of room to fill in some residential there before it's eaten up. Does that help answer your question?
I think it does. It describes that balancing act that I guess we have in that discretionary role, to make sure we don't lose sight of what Councilman Burnt's saying, that
right.
we've got to recognize we are putting a little heavier burden on different uses to the south of the mixed-use regional.
Mr. President, if I could follow up, you're also helping them because they need rooftops and they need density and they need connections to them. And this project really, it coincides with that Hawkins property. It was designed with them in mind. It provides the connections they need. It provides the access that they need. So it really enhances their opportunity to bring that forward.
Thank you. Council, any other questions of the applicant?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate it. Staff, is there anything that we missed or should be addressing that we haven't covered?
No, I don't believe so, Council President. Thank you.
police, fire, anything? No? Okay, council. You've heard all of the staff comment, public comment, and from the applicant. How do you wish to proceed?
President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
I move that we close the public hearing on item 11C, Stapleton Subdivision H-2018-0129.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing on item 11C. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. Any discussion amongst the council?
Mr. President?
Mr. Byrd?
I'm generally in support of this project. The first thing that came to mind was exactly what Denise spoke about earlier, in regard to putting, to fill the land use, a future land use in this area would require the southern property, which is Hawkins, to develop more of it almost forces them to do something more commercial, something with retail, office space. And one of the things, I was hesitant to approve this without even Hawkins here to be able to confirm that. And with the representative Hawkins here, knowing that property has not been annexed, and we can, provide some guidelines, and knowing that as a council, we highly recommend when you come back with an application for your project that you bring something back with something commercial, office related, retail related, in order to fulfill this land use designation. So I think the application is good. Unfortunately, I would love to have 50% open space in every development that comes before us. That would be fantastic. I'm highly in support of that, although that's not what's required of the developers that come in before us. And so there's not a whole lot we can do when a developer comes and says, they fulfill the requirements that we ask of them. And it's important as a council, in my opinion, to be consistent with that. It's what the development community deserves and expects from this body. And so, and I know there's discussions in regard to that, what may or may not happen going forward. But so I think that they've done a great job with the amenities. No concerns there. So I'm in support of the project.
Mr. President?
Ms. Milo?
Yeah, I support this project. I think it's a good project. It has lots of foliage, which is very appealing. And that is one heck of a tot lot. I just have to let you guys know. Thank you very much. My only concern is the signal, which they obviously have no control over. So unless they had a STARS agreement or something to put it in and then get reimbursed later, I don't see how we can constrain the approval with that. So it stinks. It's not a great situation, but it is what it is, and it's out of their control. So I'm good.
President.
Mr. Cavanagh.
I'm going to echo a lot of the comments that were made in planning and zoning. And to me, this is a no-brainer. This is the right location for this type of product. I love the diversity of housing. We need more of that in South Meridian. So my grumbles and gripes about little things here or there, not that big of an issue in terms of when it comes to a good project. So I'm happy to support a motion or make a motion if nobody else wants to speak, and I'll navigate through this if needed.
Was there, as part of that, was there any concern over the requested waiver of local street connection, instead allowing the emergency connection as proposed by the applicant?
So, Mr. President, that is a consideration. I think that if I were to make a motion, and this is where I would ask for help from staff or legal, to make sure that the motion would incorporate the appropriate waiver for that to be an emergency access. I've wrestled with that particular piece, but ultimately feel the explanation from the developer's representative is sufficient enough for my sake in making a motion. I'm a big supporter of connectivity and would like to always see more connectivity as opposed to less connectivity. But I think in this particular circumstance, a waiver, if that's the appropriate vehicle, is something I'd support. So it would be contemplated, should I be the one who's making the motion. All right, Mr. President, here we go. Let's see if I can not screw this up. Mr. President, I move we approve item 11C Stapleton subdivision H-2018-0129, include all applicant, staff, and public testimony, with special consideration for items A2E and A3G, that a waiver be provided to the applicant for emergency access as opposed to a local street connection. There is another request that I had on my note. Oh, so as it pertains to ITD's letter I deem as adequate. So I'm supportive of vacating or that variance. I guess I don't understand what you're asking, Cal. So that would be my motion, Mr. President.
Wait, when there's two commissions, we do that.
I'll second the motion for some discussion. Questions?
Like that.
No questions, no discussion, nothing to add?
Mr. President?
Yes.
The request also was on the signal be done as warranted and not tied to the phase, as was in the staff report. And I just wanted to make sure, I'm certain this is what Councilmember Cavanagh meant, but you are basically allowing the withdrawal of the variance for the access and granting the modification under the code provision in 11.3H3, I think it is.
So, Mr. President, I guess two points here. Yes, Mr. Neri, your recollection or your report or review is correct. I didn't address condition 1D pertaining to the signal because I didn't think that's a determination that we could make. So if we need to remove that piece from the staff report, I'm supportive of amending my motion to include that. I just didn't know, because it doesn't pertain to us, if we should. So,
Mr. President, members of council, you would, since it is a directive to be included as a requirement, and basically, so you would be removing that requirement and following the ITD recommendation that they provide the cost share with it and it be done when warranted by ITD.
So, Mr. President, based on that, I'd like to amend my motion to include striking the requirement to construct the signal at Harris with Phase 2, but only to provide the appropriate cost share for the time deemed by ITD for the construction of the signal.
Second agree? Yes. That's me. So, God. Any other discussion? Any question on what the motion is? Crystal clear?
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
Just want to make sure for staff, you're good with that. I know I muddied that up pretty bad tonight. It's been a long day, my apologies.
Good with that?
I think
Got it all.
All right, thank you. Appreciate council patience.
We're good, no questions. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Aye. Thank you, everybody. We have one public hearing left. Item 10D. 10D is a public hearing on East Ridge Number 1. It's a city council review of a irrigation easement issue. We will begin this public hearing with staff comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Last project before you this evening is for city council review of an irrigation easement, as previously stated. The site consists of 41 acres of land, is zoned R4, and is located north of East Lake Hazel Road and west of South Eagle Road. In 2017, the property was annexed and received preliminary plat approval for East Ridge Estates with 139 buildable lots and 7 common lots on 41 acres. In 2018, a final plat was approved with a condition regarding the irrigation easement that we're speaking of tonight. The request is for City Council review to allow the Grimmett lateral within a 40-foot irrigation easement along the rear boundary of lots 5 through 10 and a portion of Lot 11, Block 1, to remain as an easement on buildable lots rather than being contained in a common lot in accord with UDC 11A, or 11-3A 6D. A condition was included in the final plat in 2018 and was discussed during the hearing at the time on July 17th. Requiring the applicant to either place the irrigation easement in a common lot or seek council modification to include it as part of the adjacent buildable lots. Due to the topography of the area, several of the lots within this development are located within a slope easement. The lots in question contain both the slope easement as well as the Grimmett lateral irrigation easement. Staff has received public testimony in regard to the maintenance and erosion resulting from the slope easement existing within buildable lots in this development. These concerns have been echoed throughout the area due to the topography of the area, especially in this part of Meridian. Similar slope easements exist in Sky Mesa and Southern Highlands, north of the subject property. Staff does understand these concerns, however, they are not applicable to the subject application. A staff report was submitted by the Boise Project Board of Control at the time of the preliminary plat and annexation application indicating their preference to keep the easement unencumbered. And to get further clarification for this staff report, staff did contact the Boise Project and was informed that their irrigation district does not want any portion of the 40-foot easement within buildable lots. Staff finds the best location for the easement is within a common lot in accord with UDC 11-3A 6D. Location of the easement within a common lot will provide an easily accessible easement for the irrigation district and will ensure that future residents will not be responsible for maintaining an unusable 40-foot part of their rear of their property. Locating the easement within a common lot may also prevent potential code enforcement issues in the future and or issues that the irrigation district may incur upon homeowners. Written testimony was received from Laddie and Andrea Toluchek against the subject application with concern regarding weeds and erosion associated with the slope along the rear of the lots with reference to slope easements within common lots. And Susan Carnes, who is requesting denial of the application with concern regarding erosion, weeds, lack of watering, and general maintenance issues associated with slope easements. Staff recommends the applicant locate the irrigation easement within a common lot and obtain approval of a final plat modification prior to obtaining city engineer's signature on the final plat. A revised landscape plan shall be submitted with that final plat modification, indicating landscaping in accord with Boise Project Control's allowances. So with that, staff will stand for any questions.
Thank you, council. Any questions? Welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
You bet.
Through all of it.
Oh, it's a great night. Mr. President, members of the council, Jim Conger, 4824 West Fairview Avenue. In front of you, this is obviously one of our final plats. We'll have 3 ultimately on this project. This particular one is the estate lots, which is our phase 1. It's that little gray strip that you see in the corner, up to the east boundary to the midpoint. Basically, yes, if you call any irrigation district, they'll say we'd love to have our easement in a common area. When you go through the 14-month process to create this deed, that was a deed created in 1940 that I got to re-up because I'm moving a portion of it, and that takes 14 months. You go through this entire process, and you get brand new language that doesn't say, put me in a common lot. They know it's a residential development. So this in front of you is our deed easement, and it's the language that says, hey, we get the use and enjoyment of our property, because you can imagine in 1940 when they negotiated their first lease, if they would have told that farmer, you don't get to do anything on this property, they would have got thrown off the property before the easement got written. But it does say I cannot, erection of buildings and structures or permission actually to the public to access. Oh, that makes sense. So this is obviously what the language is. We don't want to go use the property any more than what this easement allows with Project Board of Control. We're not interfering with the easement. It'll function the same. And I think really what it comes down to is when we went through this process of getting an approval, we heard it from, I think we had 50 neighbors in here, as some of you all remember, and the council kept saying, this is the rim, we want you to go back, we want estate-size homes on the rim in Meridian. We don't have a lot of that, and this is a good spot for that. We bought into that statement. We went back, redrew our project, and came back with estate lots, and actually worked very hard with the neighbors, specifically the adjacent neighbor to the west, Kathy Baumgartner, was very much a champion in those negotiations. And we came back with our smaller product out towards Lake Hazel where it belongs and preserved the rim lots. These are half-acre lots and three-quarter-acre lots. Point of all of this is we don't need to make these lots smaller. People live and want to say they're on a half acre. We have all the way up to 3/4 of an acre lot. But we start reducing the square footage where all of a sudden I don't have estate lots. Yes, maybe estate lots to sell, but also that, people, even though they're not using them, want the benefit to say that they have the half-acre home site. Now, we, as all know, we had the wettest February for about 40 years. We get about 12 inches of rain in this valley a year. We got 11 inches up through April 10th. So I'm just saying, we have struggled with our slopes because we built them all winter and we haven't been able to go finish prep them. I just got the irrigation and the trees put in it, and that'll get looking good. But the point of this is, if I go back and forth, you can see the yellow area. Forget about the irrigation easement for a minute. During our preliminary plat process, we were allowed the approval through that plat process to create our home sites go to the edge of our property, as you see in the right screen, but we have what's called a slope easement that we committed to in the approval process to have our HOA maintain these. We didn't actually fight that at all. We think it's a great idea. So the thought of the letters that just came in over the last couple days, that this easement, which is down in the gravel area, mind you, that you can see, we're just finishing that. The irrigation districts, if you need 12 feet, they want about 30 feet of gravel just in case. So the point of this is we are a little sliver that's already encumbered by the use easement. I, as the developer, am putting the wrought iron across the top, which you can see has not started yet. That entire area was too muddy from the winter we had, and we had to remove a couple feet and put it back in. But the point of that being is we will have wrought iron across the top. Our plat, which I continue to show you, that dashed line of where the yellow is the encumbrance that we put on that the rest of the balance will be maintained by the HOA. So as much as we agree with code and even staff on you should usually do a common lot, I'm calling that a small lot concept. I don't believe in an environment where we have these bigger lots that it makes sense that you have to do the common lot in the back of these. We are already addressing it in the CC&Rs, which will be recorded. My last point of this, and I think it comes back to the estate lots and the city and ourselves, we bought the property, pretty proud of this rim, and BlackRock's proud of their homes on the rim, is I have done probably 5, 6, or 7 foothills projects in my lifetime in Boise. And this is reminiscent of my foothills days in Boise. If you want estate lots and you want lots that are on slopes and hills, you're going to have a portion of these lots that are encumbered and not usable by the homeowner. That's normal. But you always give them their 3/4 of an acre or their half an acre. No one's going to come up in here and live on a 10,000 square foot pad or lot and with the view and everything. You just don't encumber that in a common area. So we function, I will stop now, but basically everything functions. The maintenance of the slope area is not up for question today, but the maintenance of the irrigation easement, we need it by the HOA. It's already encumbered and says in my plat it's going to be by the HOA. Whether that's in a common lot or whether that stays in easement as I'm requesting or even borderline begging, it's going to function identical and be maintained by the HOA. That's it. I definitely would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Jim.
And I would definitely love to have an easement.
Council questions? So I do, if I could. So remind me, and I apologize, I got myself sideways digging back and trying to figure this out. The slope easement also, the irrigation easement, do they overlap?
Yes, President Borton. The slope easement is, in this case is my green area
Yeah.
and the road area. The irrigation easement is just the road area. So if we come back to this screen, the orange is, hey, we're taking a highlighter strip across here, but the yellow is slightly bigger. Now, at the very south end, they match. That orange and yellow are the same area at the very south end, which is the bottom.
And the portion of the slope easement to the north, are those all within the private parcel ownership yet maintained by the HOA?
100%. Great question. So if you look at my yellow areas,
Right.
the white areas are the pads and where my wrought iron fence will be.
Right.
The yellow area, but you can see, let's go up to the upper right corner. You can see where the lot lines go all the way to the end of the yellow in every one of those. So they are all identical. The residential lot is the entire area. The slope easement is the yellow inside of a residential lot that'll be maintained by the HOA. Not complicated in the documents, though. It's extremely easy in the master declaration. We've already done that, but.
So the concern of maintenance, consistent maintenance and weed abatement, et cetera, that is taken care of in the orange as it is the yellow since they overlap throughout the
That
whole
is-
area?
President Borton, that is correct. That's already accounted for in the CCNRs as they're written because of the slope area easement. Correct.
Council, any questions?
President Borton.
Ms. Little Roberts?
Jim, so if it stays an irrigation easement, then the HOA can maintain it and have control over weeds and things like that? Because I know that that's not always a top priority, nothing against irrigation entities.
Yes, Mr. President and City Councilmember Little Roberts. Yes, the whole point of the yellow area is because of the weeds and any of them. And we put in an irrigation system when we had our original approval. That wasn't a requirement. We were going to dry land that. We went and spent a lot of time on our other developments in Boise and the foothills, and you just don't get. We think this is a prominent look from Eagle Road, so we went in and put the irrigation, and actually, if you look at our landscape plan, we've doubled the trees and everything on it as well. But that is just some self-gratification I said out loud. The real answer to that question is, yes, we will be maintaining weeds in that road because it's in that same HOA managed area.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Perfect.
Council, any other questions? Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Jim. You bet. Mr. Clerk, do we have any signups?
We had Andrea Shelton sign up. I do not believe she's here.
Okay. And Denise, do you want to come forward?
Denise Lefevre, 6706 North Salvia Way, Meridian. There's only two really concerns, is that it's really clear that when it comes to the weeds, that somebody's taking care of it so you don't end up with a fire issue from burning. And then the one concern I'd have, if I were buying a lot there and that irrigation easement was there, I'd want to have it really clear that there's some real restrictions on what I can do with my property. So when you go back and you include that as your acreage, but you have all these restrictions, you don't really have the rights to your properties. So not opposed per se, but I think they really need to make it clear that you don't have the full rights and you can't just go plant whatever you want, do whatever you want with it. So that's one of my only concerns, is just really clear that will HOA have access? Can they fence their yard? You know, how is the HOA going to have access to the property? So that's it. So just a couple of things to think about.
Okay. Thanks, Denise. Anyone else from the public who wishes to provide some testimony? From everybody and anybody? Applicant want to make some final comments, maybe address Denise's question?
Mr. President, members of the council, Jim Conger again. Yeah, I could have made it a little clearer on that use easement, which is outside the fence. We actually, those homeowners are severely restricted. We don't want them planting a blade of grass on it. It is 100% maintained by the HOA, and if there's additional plantings, it has to be through the HOA itself. It's delineated by a legal description on the plat, and I'm talking about how it's delineated in the CCNRs, and it's also delineated in layman's terms by the wrought iron and everything below the wrought iron. So we wanted layman's terms so an individual wouldn't think they can go out there, plus we did it legally to get it. Now, the point of that is we don't want a doghouse, we don't want a viewing center, we don't want cute little couple having wine glasses and a little table out there. That slope is not made for any of that. This access road for the irrigation easement is just part and parcel of the whole bigger picture, and it's already addressed in the CCNRs.
One of the questions was a concern over access. Is there anything that would restrict the HOA's access to the irrigation company blocking something that might prevent you from doing that maintenance? I think that was one of the questions.
Mr. President, members of the council, yeah, I heard Denise's comment was she was worried that the HOA would have access to it.
Right.
I am more than happy to show her our landscape plan and how the fence plan and how that's all 100% open. That whole yellow area is 100% unfenced. Our fencing is at the top, which is at the white area, and its access is already granted through the plat for the HOA to maintain it, but there's no access issues. We do not want it fenced and encumbered. It's not a pathway, but it's maintained by the HOA. Yep, perfect, thanks.
Council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
I move we close the public hearing on item H-2019-0041.
Moved and seconded to close the public hearing on item 11D. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Public hearing is closed.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
just a comment for council, and it somewhat dovetails in your comments earlier, Council President Borton. This one kind of threw me for a loop, because you got kind of competing easements, and I remember the public hearing and some of the commitments from the developer about this piece of land being maintained by the HOA. Then to receive comments from the public that kind of question or concern that, it kind of threw me for a loop. And I say all that just because I want to compliment staff. And this is something that I don't do near as often as I should, and I would encourage you all to do it. If you get thrown sideways on this, that's why we have such great staff. And I was able to connect with them, clarify some of my concerns that I had seen on Friday, and feel confident in my decision. Appreciate the applicant being here and just reiterating that for the record. I think that this is, to me, a very easy request, one I'm happy to support. So, Mr. President, I move that we approve the request, request and approve the council's approval of the 40-foot irrigation easement to be contained, or not contained as a common lot, to be left, essentially, we ask it to be left as is? As an easement, great.
On the buildable
An
lot.
irrigation easement. On the buildable lots, thank you. Boy, I am,
It's been moved and seconded to approve the application in 11D, allowing the easements to remain on buildable lots. Any discussion? If not, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Burnt. Aye. Councilmember Palmer. Aye. Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye. Thanks for your patience. Item number 12, ordinance number 19-1824. We'll have this ordinance read by title only. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ordinance 19-1824, authorizing community service officers to enforce fire code parking regulations.
Short and sweet. We've heard this ordinance read in its entirety, or read in its title. Anyone want to hear it read in its entirety? No. Good answer. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Little Roberts.
I move that we approve ordinance 19-1824 with suspension of rules.
second?
It's been moved and seconded in motion to approve ordinance 19-1824 with suspension of rules. If there's no discussion, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Burnt.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer.
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh.
Aye.
Councilmember Borton.
Aye. Brings us to the end of the agenda. Oh, yeah, great, sweet. Now, is there a motion to adjourn?
Mr. President, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good work.